Hello everyone and welcome back to Growing with God. Today we are going to be looking at the verse Matthew chapter 12 verse 29 and trying to find a solution to the question of why Jesus talked about binding a strong man in this verse. So first let's take a look at what the verse says. It says, "Or else how can one enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods except he first binds the strong man and then he will spoil his house?" So the statement of Christ here is, I think, pretty straightforward if you want to just look at its literal meaning. If you want to steal from the owner of a house, it is important that you target and take down the owner himself before you try to go after his possessions, these things he owns. But the question is, what value does this exactly bring to us Christians? And what does this really mean? So based on my study, I have come to realize that this is an analogy to actually describe how God establishes his ideas and sets things up generally. And this verse is telling us that when God wants to tackle a system, he goes after what is leading the system and defeats that. And then this allows him to, establish the rest of his plan. And a story in the Bible that will help us understand how this really works is with the Israelites, how he freed them from Egypt. Because God knew he couldn't just take the Israelites from a well-thriving kingdom that Egypt already was and then just establish them somewhere else. So what he did instead was to destroy the Egyptian kingdom with the 10 plagues that we know in Exodus chapters 7 to 12. And then after the plague of the firstborn in chapter 12, the Egyptian kingdom was weakened to such an extent that Pharaoh could, let the Israelites go, as we know. And then God could take his people to himself. So this is how God was able to bind the strong man, that is the Egyptian kingdom, and was able to spoil or take his goods, that is the Israelites. But of course, this story was something that happened thousands of years ago. So the question is, how does this relate to us now? Well, it actually does relate to us still because God actually wants to repeat what he did with the Israelites and free his people from another system. We see this discussed in Jeremiah chapter 50 verses 33 to 34 of how God would send a redeemer and give his people rest. But however, this time the freedom covers the entire world, not just a small pocket of people living in Egypt. Basically, our world has been ruled by a strong man for thousands of years. This strong man is Satan, by the way, who was said to be the god of this world, preventing us from knowing God. We see this discussed by St. Paul in one of his letters to the Corinthians, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4. It says, "In whom the god of this world, that is Satan, hath blinded the minds of those which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them." So the way Satan blinded us is by putting us under wicked kings in the past. And we see how this has a great effect on people, like with Jeroboam in 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 26, where it says that because Israel had a wicked ruler, Jeroboam, everyone in Israel ended up sinning by extension. It says that he made Israel to sin. But the point is, God has freed us from this system and will also free us from the bondages that we have now by reforming this current world, allowing humans to live in it in peace and happiness. However, Satan's kingdom is still thriving in some way or another, so he needs to defeat this kingdom and then he'll be able to establish his own, which the righteous will be able to live in and thrive in. As it was said in Isaiah chapter 32 verses 17 to 18, chapter 33 verse 20, etc. But to do that, he has to bind or chain Satan, as it was said in Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 to 4. So the idea is that Satan would be fought, so he could become weak, and then Jesus the King would have power to destroy Satan's house. Then what is Satan's house? Well, it's the institutions of government, the economic systems, and so on, that all belong to Satan. And this is because they were all a means of exploitation and manipulation of the people who are under these systems. And for those of us who may know history, we know how these systems were, gaining at the expense of other people, and generally the people were losing out. But what I've been trying to say in this video is that the overall idea of Matthew chapter 12 verse 29 is trying to say that just as a person would bind a strong man to weaken his house, God would try to bind Satan to weaken his own wicked house. But anyway, I think I can stop here on discussing the meaning of Matthew chapter 12 verse 29 and why Jesus told us to bind the strong man, or talked about binding the strong man. This verse once again reads, "Or else how can one enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods, except he first binds the strong man, and then he will spoil his house?" But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, I'll greatly appreciate if you hit those like and subscribe buttons down below, and also to click that notification bell so you will always be aware of when a new Growing with God video comes out. Have a great day. And we'll see you all in the next one.